This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, where researchers come to learn, innovate, and connect.
The only way that we can really be who we can actually be is if we can look beyond the present, welcome other people in to participate with us, and work towards the long-term goals. And one of those principal goals is not just getting a job done today, but working together for the long term on whatever the job is tomorrow.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Jay Frost, speaker, trainer, and fundraising Sherpa at Frost on Fundraising. Hello, Jay. Thank you for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking about our topic today, and I've heard you speak many times over the years. I can't even remember how many years ago it was when we first met. But before we jump into this wonderful topic of donor attrition today, I'm wondering if you could share just a little bit about the kind of work you're doing now and how you get into these sort of future thinking topics like the one we're going to talk today about with donor attrition.
Sure. Well, the work I'm involved in mainly today is really threefold. So first, I'm working with organizations of lots of different sizes to find their way to a large goal, whether it's a capital campaign or endowment campaign, or just starting from scratch and building up to the point where they can do some really big things. I also spend a good chunk of my time working with organizations as a speaker. So I do address a lot of conferences. I love doing that. It's a chance to try and generate some heat and light, but also a lot of enthusiasm for topics that are compelling to me, but I'd like to think are important for all of us. And then I do spend another part of my time working with companies like Donor Search to bring other people and other voices together and host webinars and things of that nature so that there can be a chance for me to learn, but also to bring together different voices in this sector to address topics that I think have a broader area of interest for all of us.
What a great explanation. And you use the magic number 3. I love it. And these are all the things I know about you that you've been doing. You're consulting, you're speaking, and I love the Donor Search flash classes. That's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
So what takes you to these future thought topics? You know, you coined the phrase donor colony collapse. But I've heard you talk on other topics like this, where, you know, you're sort of bringing these different ideas from different sources and pulling them together and coming up with your opinion or a hypothesis. What takes you there? Why do you do that?
Well, it's not scientific, I am ashamed to admit. It's a chance to try and reinterpret and evangelize for concepts that I think are important. So sometimes this is just taking the form of identifying something in my own experience that I want to be able to translate to other people and that I do think relates to our field and more broadly to society as a whole. Not to get too poetic about it, but if we were just in this to be fundraisers or to work with nonprofits or to be specifically in a niche like research, which is critically important, but still it is just a subset of everything we do. All those things are great, but they're not nearly as important as what we're actually doing through these organizations and with our donors for society as a whole. So that's really what compels me. And I think if anything, over time, I've become more and more, not just committed to that, but willing to put myself forward and be authentic about it and be passionate about it and be willing to speak from the heart. So when it comes to a topic like this one that we're talking about today, I'm interested in this way beyond donor attrition, which is very important to us in the nonprofit realm. If we don't have donors, we don't have money. I know that's true, and that's part and parcel of everything we need to be thinking about every day. But I'm also really interested in what is happening when we don't have people coming together to work towards community goals that we realize together. I see this as a problem in our politics, at the community level, and certainly in the nonprofit industry. So I'm interested in trying to find a way to say, can't we really come together and address these things and think a little more boldly? That's what motivates me.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that personal perspective on our work, but also how we perceive it and interact with it. That's really cool, Jay.
Thanks.
So let's go ahead, jump right in. You
Sure.
keep talking about to different groups and stuff about donor colony collapse. I'm intrigued. I have to admit, it sounds like a clickbait title, which is good. And I'm thinking you probably do have some real data behind it, some sources that you've pulled together to come up with that. So if you'd be willing to share what you mean by that, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, sure. And it is a little clickbaity, but not nearly as much as I'd like it to be. I mean, when I start hitting the numbers of the top people on Twitter with something like this, then I'll be celebrating. But the main point is to try and say, you know what, here's something we recognize, even if we don't know a lot about it. And that's that if you don't have bees, you don't have fruit. And before we begin our conversation today, I shared with you something offline, and that is that my family has been in the orchard business for 135 years. But there's a big difference between the world my grandfather and great-grandfather inhabited when they lived on that place, and they were planting those trees with their own hands. And they were relying on the bees raised there or raised in adjacent towns to make sure that those trees were pollinated, and then they produced fruit, and they were able to eat the fruit and bring it to market and all those things. And the world I'm in, which is I'm working out of Northern Virginia, and the farm is in Michigan. And so I'm a little distant from that. And I think that may be an analogy to a lot of what's going on, even in fundraising. That might sound like a stretch, but what I've been noticing is that if I'm in a little part of the fundraising world, like the major gifts world, which is largely what I do today, and I come from that world of research and data, which is, of course, the world we both love, that's all well and good, but it's only one slice. I'm really concerned about the fact that we haven't been able to retain donors. And the reason I think we haven't been able to retain them is not because there's some kind of natural state which has changed. Like suddenly there aren't bees pollinating fruit, and suddenly there aren't donors interested in our charities. I don't think this is about a deflation of altruism. I think this is about things that we are not doing that facilitate people coming together and doing big things together. I think that failure is particularly evident with the failure of not-for-profit organizations and all of our niches within them to reach out to the rising generation of people, which is larger and, in fact, in many ways, far more committed to community than, let's say, boomers and millennials have been. And I don't really like those terms, but for convenience, it helps us to talk about them. I'm really enthusiastic about the possibilities of talking to, again, this rising generation of people, especially under 30, which is enormous in size and very engaged in the community. We can see that in the statistics. But I'm concerned that the organizations haven't figured out that it's important to talk to them and talk to them in ways that are real, tangible, and meaningful. And so for those reasons, I'm very concerned. And I think that, again, the statistics demonstrate that. So much of my interest in this developed when I was reading this article. I think most of us have seen at this point that has to do with the In Search of America's Missing Donors, which was a chronic philanthropy piece, I think now a year and a half ago. And there was a statistic in there that was just mind-boggling to me. And they said that from 2000 to 2014, the share of Americans donating to charity, and I assume they mean adults, but the share of Americans donating to charity dropped 11 percentage points from 66.2% to 55.5%. But I remember when I started, I'm in my mid-50s now, when I started in the field, we talked about 70%. I haven't been able to source that statistic, but it definitely feels right, that about 70% of the U.S. population was engaged in giving, not just volunteerism, but pulling out a wallet and giving. We've seen a dramatic decline in that, but we've also at the same time, of course, all seen that philanthropy, at least as of the last Giving USA statistics, is $410 billion. So you've got a smaller and smaller group of people giving more and more money. Why is that? I think it's because of what we do so well. We know how to target groups of people and individuals who have massive resources and are demonstrated to have a philanthropic propensity or history. That's great. We develop relationships with them, especially in higher ed, then maybe hospitals, and then declining on down. We do it very well. And we have massive campaigns. There have been, I think, 170 campaigns at $1 billion plus since the Stanford campaign that started this whole cycle. All of that is terrific. But then what about everybody else that we're not truly engaging, that we're treating like human ATMs? This is something we can change. And until we recognize the raw data, which says smaller number of people, percentage of people rather, giving more and more money. And that could change at any moment with the stock market, of course, because much of that wealth is predicated on stock value. What are we going to do when those things change? Well, the only thing we can do is start to really talk to people as human beings instead of treating them like people who are going to give $3 to a political campaign. And so it's those data points which helped me to realize what I was seeing in campaigns, and then made me think, well, perhaps we should be talking about this more broadly, having a conversation together and saying, what is it specifically that we can do that's going to develop real partnership with our donors and prospective donors, so we stop just asking them for a few bucks at the bottom and spending all of our time on just less than 0.1% of the population on the top, because that is unsustainable.
Wow. Good stats. Love it. And I can feel the collapse part of your argument, where if we don't continue the conversation and continue to engage what we used to call the bottom of the pyramid, those smaller, unrestricted gifts that came in every year, the top could just fall down, and we could really struggle to sustain the entire nonprofit sector.
Right. Yeah. It's painful because it really doesn't have to be this way. There are some other great statistics about this rising generation and just what they do. They don't have as much money, right? I mean, younger people generally don't. But what they're doing in the absence of having that wealth yet is pretty extraordinary. So just for Gen Z alone, 59% donate to charity, largely through social media messaging. 32% donate their own money, not their parents' money, their money. 50% look for volunteer positions. But what are we doing to really engage in those volunteers? So all these things are indicative of opportunity. And I think even more importantly, people who are actively ready to do something for the community as they define it, not as we do. So if we can just recognize that, that's a set of facts, and then build on that by building funnels, the way we do marketing funnels, well, funnels for volunteers. Instead of just telling them what we need, right? What are our organizational needs that they should be funding at the checkbox of $25 and hoping for the best at a 0.5% response rate. Instead, ask them what they think we should be doing. Can you imagine the difference? If we've got a declining population of donors at the top, or when you look at the whole population, but you can see such a large percentage of this one generation already giving, but giving largely without being asked. What is the potential if we actually engage them, find out what they want, and then ask them to do what they want to do?
Well, and how they want to do it. One of the things I keep seeing come up as a theme, for example, with focusing on women or other minorities. And when I read Kathleen Lair's book, Gender Matters, everything she was talking about with women really fit just good fundraising practice that for some reason we don't seem to be doing anymore, which is that active talking, taking that time and that longer perspective and fitting what we're doing with what our donors want to fund.
I couldn't agree more. And it's funny because I see some of the same kinds of things in political fundraising. It's as if instead of our teaching about stewardship to politics, so politics could be as productive and as honest as we'd like to think the nonprofit sector in, it seems like we have done the reverse, that we've learned the bad lessons of political fundraising, where we solicit very frequently. I don't have a problem in and of itself with frequency, but in a way that's very transactional, that we don't sign the end of those emails, that we don't address people by their first name, and when we do, we often get it wrong, like in political fundraising, that we ask for lowest common denominator giving, even if they've given more than that before, just like the infamous $3 solicitations from every political candidate of both parties. We can do better than that. There's this great little book by Tim Kachuriak, who's at Next After. They gather a lot of data too, but they focus on this mid-level donor. And it's a lot of these issues that you were talking about that I think Kathleen talks about, and others do, especially with regard to populations that have not been really welcomed into the existing kind of establishment charity world. All these other, ethnic minorities and so forth, which are the majority of the emerging, rising generation. And so he talks about some really interesting things. He says that very few organizations are calling, just making a phone call to the $1,000 plus donors. Majority of organizations send communication from the name of the organization not from the name of a real person. A third of organizations don't even call their donors by name. It's all these same things that people do so badly in politics. Most organizations don't really even say thank you nearly enough, that 26-time rule that we used to hear about in major gifts. And the size of your organization does not determine your ability to communicate effectively at all, right? I mean, we know that if you're a small organization or a big one, you can still carve out at least a percentage of your time to just be real, to be human, to pick up the phone, to send a text message, to post a note on Twitter just saying, you people are awesome. But instead, we largely ignore all that and only devote that kind of energy, time, and attention to a very small group of people at the very top. But that will have, of course, a big potential impact on the rest of the people who are every bit as passionate about the same missions that we are.
I love it. I'm in agreement with you, but I want to ask you a sort of devil's advocate question. So I have one client now who takes this approach, and I just got a prospect call the other day from probably a millennial, maybe aging out millennial, or at the end of that spectrum. And I'm really uncomfortable with the approach. I'm not sure why necessarily. I'm not sure I could articulate it really well, but the idea is, like for the existing client, we want to accomplish our mission in 10 years. We need 50 million to do it. We're going to simply ask a small group of people for very large gifts, multi-million-dollar gifts. And then, we're going to have our money. And the client prospect call was the same deal. He really just wanted to ask a small group of folks for the next round of funding, as he, was thinking about it in terms of entrepreneurial startups. And I just, that's hollow. Like, what do you do next if you only have this, group of people who invested in you? How do you answer someone like that? Do you have any ideas?
In fact, I've had both a number of prospective clients and real clients trying to do exactly the same thing. And as a consultant, one thing that happens frequently is people calling because they want a rainmaker. They want someone with access to a list, big donors who are going to give. And I've spent a lot of energy and probably lost a lot of income from trying to dissuade people from doing precisely that. Not only because it's relying on an outsider to bring in those donations, but because it means that they don't have to do the good and hard work of building relationships with a big community of people so they can be co-owners of the success of the mission. One part of what we need, of course, is money. No money, no mission. That's true. No bucks, no Buck Rogers, right? But if we don't make an honest and sincere effort to let other people become a part of this party, what we're effectively saying is we don't need them. And boy, that's a very dangerous approach to anything. I mean, a lot of what I was thinking about when I started thinking about this stuff and came over that clickbaity title for a presentation about donor colony collapse was thinking about what happened with the book, Robert Putnam wrote about, Bowling Alone, and how I've seen organizations, even my own practice, hollow out as they age. So not like aging out of millennialism, but people from Shriners, for example, who are getting much older, or people at service organizations, and those communities are aging. Well, what is there to replace that? What is there to replace the bowling league my mother participated in when I was a little kid? I'm not sure, but I think we could be that thing if we're willing. If we're willing to actually open our doors to share power and invite people to participate the way they want, in the timeline that fits for them. But it is a risk. I appreciate that. A person who, some of your clients reach out to you and say, well, I just want to contact a small list of people to raise the $50 million. The reality is they may be able to do that if they have a pretty decent list and a good consultant like yourself. But what is the long-term trajectory of an organization whose sole constituency is a small group of people? I think that's has particularly dangerous implications for society as a whole. And when we think back to what it was that the American experiment was really about, even before the revolution, to Tocqueville, what are we really talking about there? It's about people coming together for common purposes. We haven't always done it well, but we have done it, and we've done it repeatedly. I'm wondering if maybe in an age of digital, which I love, I mean, I'm on it all day long, all the social media platforms, et cetera. I love all those things. But if we rely on it as a way of not actually having to talk to one another, then I think we lose what makes it possible for us to not only sustain the revenue of our organizations, sustain their significance and their impact. So even if a person could reach out to a small group of donors, raise the $50 million, brush their hands, pat themselves in the back, and be done with it, I think that would be a tragedy for the country. Because the only way that we can really be who we can actually be is if we can look beyond the present, welcome other people in to participate with us, and work towards the long-term goals. And one of those principal goals is not just getting a job done today, but working together for the long term on whatever the job is tomorrow.
Wow. Well, that's some great answers. I'm going to borrow some of your phrasing there, Jay. Thank you.
Sure.
Now, before I let you go, I have one last question. And I really love the phrase now of donor colony collapse because it gives me that vision of the donor pyramid collapsing in. I love it. I got the visual. And I'm wondering, given the situation and given your opinion, your ideas about, who should be engaged and how, what would you say to nonprofits? What should they do specifically to position themselves for the future? What does it look like in terms of actions they can take?
There's so many, right? Because the tactics are where the rubber meets the road. And so maybe one simple thing would be that they have to write a strategy, right? And then they have to write a plan to support the strategy. And all that flows from the mission. I know that seems painfully obvious, but I run into a lot of organizations that have no strategic plan, have no fundraising plan. So let's assume that they have both those things. And then they have to have a whole lot of tactical approaches to support that, but they're also committed, like we are, to treating people like human beings instead of like ATMs. So maybe one principal thing would be let all the tactics flow from not the golden rule, but the platinum rule, right? So the golden rule we all know is to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But I like the platinum rule, which is you do unto others as they would like done unto themselves. So we do as much as we can to really understand where they're coming from, what their needs are, and make it all because of them. It's something that Jerry Panis called the boy principle, because of you. And I do think we do that very well in Major Gifts. Maybe we just can apply that principle more broadly across all those people who currently support our work or involved in it as volunteers or care about it from afar or could be there with us in the future. And so there are many things we can do to do that, right? But principle among them, let's look at our website and see right now, is there a way for somebody to volunteer and make it about the talents they want to bring and not just those that we are looking for? Maybe another thing is to operationalize our engagement with social media. So it's not just fully engagement, meaning broadcasting, but it's also an opportunity for people to share information, to really have a conversation, pathways to giving. There are lots of things like that. What about when we do one of those giving days? What are we doing to find the social ambassadors within our universe, the people with true social capital, and invite them to not just send out a tweet or post something to Instagram, but actually ask them, what is it that they think we should be doing to advance this cause in the next 3 years? How is it that you'd like to participate with us to make that happen? And all the way down to just doing what St. Jude's does, and they do it very well. Just every time somebody makes a donation, pick up the phone. I have to say, several years ago, I went to a small regional opera company, and our son was young at the time, and there was an envelope on the chair for everybody in that place. And it was one of those things you can make a donation. And so at one point during the opera, my son, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Dad, can I have $1?" And so I gave him $1, and he put it in the envelope, and he wrote some stuff on it. And I didn't think anything of it until a week later, I received a handwritten note from the head of the opera company thanking me for my generous $1 donation. And it was not a sarcastic note. They took the time to treat me as a person. And I think that every tactic can and should flow from that example.
Wow, that's wonderful. I love it. Even $1 matters. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
That was Jay Frost, speaker, trainer, and fundraising Sherpa at Frost on Fundraising.
As a prospect research professional, I find that I'm often far removed from the actual donor, but if I'm to do my job well, I need to really understand fundraising. I hope that you enjoyed the conversation today about the donors behind the dollars and how our fundraising practices affect our donors, our organizations, and ultimately our communities. To find chat bites and more prospect research resources, visit us at www.prospectresearchinstitute.org. Until next time.